Hi, folks. It's Mark Merrill with Firm, Fairness in Reporting Media. So, what about the Second Amendment? Let's have a discussion and a presentation about it, shall we, folks? The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights reads as follows, ladies and gentlemen. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we have a lot of information that we've uncovered, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get to it, we pose a question as well. As you see right here, a shield, an American patriotic shield that represents the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. But Firm asks, how is the Second Amendment enforced? Of course, in the day and ages we live in, not exactly something we want to mess up. The Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms is under a link and a website called constitution.findlaw.com. Some of this was written up and legally reviewed by a Samuel Strom and legally by Edward Maggio, Esquire, back in July of 2022. The Second Amendment prevents the government from infringing on one's right to keep and bear arms. The amendment has led to intense debates about whether the right applies to everyone or just those involved with a state militia, and what types of gun control regulations the government may impose. Surprise. The Second Amendment comprises just a single sentence that allows for considerable interpretation. It was enacted in 1789 alongside 9 other amendments collectively known, as everyone knows, as the Bill of Rights. It prohibits the government from infringing upon a well-regulated militia. The amendment is also a contentious topic. Is that right? Gee, I didn't realize it was contentious. Yeah, a little levity there. Darn little. Some people believe it provides people with an absolute right to own weapons. Others argue, that its text limits the right to bear arms to purposes related to serving in a state militia. But, as always, the Supreme Court issued very few groundbreaking opinions on the topic until 2008. Gee, just 7 years ago. Wow. Then, at that time, the court found that the Second Amendment does, in fact, protect an individual's right to bear arms. Subsequent developments have answered the limits of government regulation regarding gun ownership. However, other questions, such as precisely who can possess guns, remain unanswered. As we read the Second Amendment, as it is printed, folks. But we're going to skip down a little bit on some of the frequently asked questions. Just read a few excerpts from it in this brief but important podcast. What about the Second Amendment? The original intent? Some historians argue that the primary reason for the amendment was to prevent the need of the United States to have a professional standing army. Alexander Hamilton argued the point in the Federalist Papers. Others say the fear of a standing army is the reason for the Second Amendment protections, which means they say the citizens' right to bear arms served as a necessary check in case of a tyrannical government. Now, why in the world would even back then, folks, the Founding Fathers in the late 1700s come up with an idea like that, that the amendment should prove to be the reason for citizens' rights to bear arms served as a necessary check in case of a tyrannical government? Sad, but here we are, folks. not Donald Trump. We're talking about Biden Harris. And we dare even say, here at Firm, with our First Amendment rights already protected, the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton when she was part of his Secretary of State staff. Scholars seem to agree that concerns over military power and state militias have largely fallen by the wayside. So today, present day, 2025, preserving gun rights and firearm possession is more important for the purposes of self-defense. Now, we could close the book on this story and this issue about the Second Amendment right here and there, folks, but there's more to it than that. It also allows for recreational gun use, such as hunting, target shooting. And the article explores these ideas in the history of the Second Amendment, which is in another location of the site. We will provide the site for you. What does the right to bear arms really mean? In the Supreme Court case of District of Columbia versus Heller, the one we were talking about of 2008, the court analyzed the meaning. Justice Antonin Scalia, you may recall not long ago, wrote for the majority. And he began by looking at the meaning of arms in the 1700s. In a 1773 dictionary, arms were defined as weapons of offense or armor of defense. A 1771 legal dictionary defined them as anything that a man wears for his defense or takes into his hands or uses in wrath to cast at or strike another. Now, Scalia wrote that arms refers to weapons that were not specifically designed for military use and were not employed in a military capacity. In the court's opinion, the Second Amendment extends to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding. To keep arms, in that phrase, folks, the court analyzed examples from the founding era that mentioned the phrase, and Scalia concluded that the right to keep arms is an individual right unrelated to militia service. In other words, it refers to possessing arms for everyone, not just militia members. The court then analyzed the term to bear arms. The court wrote that in the 1700s, bear meant to carry. However, when one continues bear with arms, the meaning changes to one indicating a right to carry arms for a particular purpose, confrontation. The court also noted that 9 state constitutions at the time provided rights to their citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state, or bear arms in defense of himself or herself at the state. In summary, the right to bear arms generally refers to a person's right to possess weapons. A person does not need to join a militia to receive Second Amendment guarantees to keep and bear arms. Instead, it guarantees, hear this well, folks, instead, the amendment guarantees that people have a right to possess and carry weapons in case of confrontation. Now, there's a history of the Second Amendment, folks. We're not going to get too much into that. Also about weapon possession as a fundamental right, militias and securing a free state, and a short list, but it's on this site, constitution.findlaw.com, of United States versus Cruikshank, Presser versus Illinois, United States versus Miller, the one we just mentioned, District of Columbia versus Heller, and 2 more, McDonald of City versus City of Chicago, McDonald versus City of Chicago, 3 more, Caetano versus Massachusetts, and New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Bruin, as recent as 2022. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, and that's a lot to digest, think about. So everyone out there, the biological, sane, and civil, ladies and gentlemen, as you are, boys and girls, the information on the Second Amendment and another piece of advice we'd like you to keep in mind in this age of mis- and disinformation tactics by the minority left-wing radicals, and the media is no help either. There would be no enforcement, literally, of the First Amendment without the Second Amendment. So that's our presentation briefly here, folks, on what about the Second Amendment? Well, there's a few things to think about, as always. You can find our program on YouTube, Twitter, or X, and contact us anytime. If you have some ideas on topics, some information we may not have even thought about, or an issue that we haven't even thought about putting on a podcast in our program. But we are Fairness in Reporting Media. And to reach us anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com, fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com. Stay safe, everyone. Peace to all.